Continue for many years after that, and the theatre did as well, though the theatre fell on harder times, and they resorted eventually to things like wrestling.
Now, I've heard about the ham and egg parade. What was that?
Well, when the pier, the first pier was built, there was a little promenade. It was really basically a broad walk, which was faced in stone, and it had little timber steps down onto the shore. And along this broad walk there were little wooden huts, which the gentry, when they went for their afternoon walk, would be able to go and buy a cup of tea, and this was known as Teapot Row. But this was eventually taken down round about 1871 because the influx of people coming into New Brighton was such that they needed more accommodation. So another group of businessmen got together and they decided they would build a block of apartments with some little shops as well. And these shops housed tea rooms, sweet shops, shooting galleries, slot machine, arcades, and little things like that. And it was very well frequented, and it had got this narrow broad walk in front of it. It got terribly crowded, and I'm sure a lot of people got pushed over the side onto the shore. It was so well populated, and it acquired a terrible reputation, and the reputation was because of the women and the drains. And when it was high water, the drains backed up and they didn't have any proper traps, and some of the drains went directly into the places where they were selling food, ham and eggs. This is why it got known as a ham and egg parade. And Jerome K. Jerome wrote in a magazine in London that he had gone along the seafront, and in the course of 500 yards he was accosted several times by women into these so-called tea rooms, and it was virtually impossible for young men to be able to go along the seafront without being accosted. Of course, when the Ham and Egg Parade was taken down in 1907, they had to do something about the promenade because it was far too narrow. So they extended the promenade further onto the shore and made it as wide as we've got it today. So the original stone wall is the one they built in 1907. And then they set about the demolition of the building, and they replaced it with the Victoria Gardens and the Floral Pavilion. The Floral Pavilion was opened in 1913 as an open-air complex and was eventually roofed over in 1925. And a lot of famous people came and performed at the Floral Pavilion.
Well, the name Wilkie has been synonymous with New Brighton and entertainment at New Brighton for years and years and years, and the great-nephew of the founder is David Wilkie. David, how did it all start?
My great-uncle was working in a rope factory, and he was working with his brother, and they used to rig up what we call an aerial ropeway. They used to call it an aerial railway at the time. They used to rig up a rope from the top of the building to a big haystack at the bottom of the building, and they used to slide down on leather belts, and that was a form of entertainment for them in the lunch hours. And it became so popular with all the friends and people who visited the factory that they decided to ask the local fairground if they could rig something up when the local fairground came to town for the summer season. So they did this, and it was very, very popular, so popular that the fairground asked them to travel with them. And they travelled with that fairground for approximately 12 years. They came back to New Brighton and decided to settle down here, and they managed to get a piece of or involved with the old palace buildings. Eventually they expanded and took over the old palace buildings, and that was quite successful for them for a very long time until my great-uncle George became quite ill, and that's when my grandfather came on the scene, who was a drummer, and he was selling sheet music on the promenade at the time. And he did very well for himself and ended up taking over the business from the family, and that's how it all started with him.
The new palace came along in 1938. What happened to the old palace?
Well, there was lots of new attractions being invented at the time, and entertainment was very popular. It was a very, very popular Victorian resort, this, and obviously expanded from those days. And what he decided to do was build a more modern building and to put more modern apparatus in it. So he did this. He borrowed money and got shareholders involved and built a much bigger complex, and finished it in 1938 at the outbreak of the war. The building was complete, but the rides hadn't been purchased and put in yet. So basically the war efforts, the War Office commissioned my grandfather to use the labyrinth of tunnels underneath the building as a munitions factory. And there was 200 women working full-time, 24 hours a day on shifts, creating munitions for the war effort.
Well, after the war, the crowds came back, but then in the late 60s and early 70s, it all began to fall apart. The ferries went, the pier went, the sand had gone. And what happened after that?
Well, since what we call the heyday, unfortunately, the business has just gone from bad to worse over the years up to the early 90s, really, when some drastic changes had to be made. We were mainly summer season, and we couldn't survive with the business that we were getting through the summer season. So one of the things we created about 11 years ago was the Adventure Playground, which we call Adventureland, and that's open all year round, school holidays and weekends. So that helped a lot. And then 3 years ago I put in the go-kart track, which is for arrive and drive on a daily basis, open every day throughout the year, and we do an awful lot of corporate entertaining, which we incorporate without a licensed function suite which holds 200 people. So things like this have brought us business all year round instead of just the summer season. So we're working harder than ever.
So what's New Brighton's future, and where will the Wilkie family fit into it?
Well, I'd like to think that the Wilkie family will always have a piece of involvement in New Brighton. But yes, with this new project that's coming up at the moment, this big Sundome, I hope it comes off. There's a lot of projects that have come and gone, and let's hope that this is the one that's going to bring New Brighton back on the map.
Two miles along the coast, associated with New Brighton but not really part of it, Wallasey Beach, or Harrison Drive as it's sometimes known. You could have a quieter life here, although you could still be surrounded by crowds. Some of these scenes were taken in 1929. At this time, the well-known stretch of beach huts were favoured by the well-off. Up to 1932, there was a bathing station here, where one could hire costumes and towels for sea bathing. Perhaps summers were hotter in those days. It was replaced by Derby Pool, opened by Lord Derby, after whom it was named. At this time, New Brighton was the playground of the north, as hundreds of thousands flocked here every summer to enjoy the many amenities on offer. Some would come only for the day, but there were many who'd stay for the whole of their week's holiday.